Yeah, good evening and welcome to this latest edition of Jewish Money. I'm honored to be in America and to be staying by my father's house and to have a special guest, none other than my father. How are you, Dad?
I'm good.
Today, I want to discuss something that I don't really get a chance to discuss with so many people in Telstone because a lot of them are not actively in the working world. Definitely don't have a lot of experience in the business world. My father was, still is, an attorney for how many years already? You've been an attorney
I
for?
started practicing in 1983.
1983. So now 40 years he's had experience in the business world, not the Jewish business world, but from Jewish person. My father has had many experiences being an Orthodox Jewish person in the working world, in the business world. He's been part of a couple of different firms. I think you've worked, if you open your own business a couple of times. Is that true?
Well, no, I started working. My first job was at an old real estate firm. Been around quite a while. Did actually a lot of work for Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Then subsequently in other real estate firms. There was a stint also where I was on my own and also had a combined practice at that and real estate as well, business of real estate. So it's been a very, very nice ride, and I'm now in my twilight and look back fondly on my long career.
So I have one question usually on my shows. Is basically one general question. We'll branch off into more specific questions. The question I have is, as a from Orthodox Jewish person in a non-Jewish American business world, I'm sure you collaborated with a lot of non-Jewish people. What was it like being from Jew and being a visibly Jewish person? At some times you probably wear yarmulke, sometimes not. How did it, Shabbos and kashrus and things like that, make it difficult or, make for interesting situations in terms of navigating that in the primarily a non-Jewish business world? And really the second part is, what, if any, instances of anti-Semitism were either directly sent to you or indirectly. So let's start with the first part of the question. Any interesting situations that came up, and how was it in a general sense navigating being from Orthodox Jewish person in a non-Jewish American business world?
Well, certainly it was probably easier than it was 40 years before I had started, or even going back 60 years and so on. People like Nat Lewin, who graduated, I think, from Harvard Law and had a difficulty getting a job, if I'm not mistaken. Alan Dershowitz, I think, had his own issues as well. It was hard for Jews in general, but that had subsided. I think by the time I was practicing in 1982, 1983, he was definitely more able to get a job. Many times, of course, when you interviewed, I did not wear a yarmulke, and many people advised that you not do it because there were people who basically wouldn't give you a second interview even if they liked you if they saw that, and that was the kind of message that went around. But ultimately, throughout the career, I can say that I've had very interesting experiences, mostly positive. But getting in the door is the difficulty. And if you don't get in the door and you don't get your first job, you don't have the experience to get another job. So once they see what your work is like, that speaks for itself.
So when you were looking for your first job, you said you wouldn't wear a yarmulke. Would you tell them that you were Jewish? Would you tell them that you needed Shabbos off and Yom Tov off? Or
no, you would never bring that up because they're not allowed to ask that, and that would be discriminatory. So you clearly wanted to see whether or not they would hire you. Having the name Lang didn't necessarily sound Jewish, so that wasn't something that stuck out. Of course, I went to Yeshiva University. high school and college.
I saw that on the resume.
And right, and once you see UC University, you kind of know that that the candidate certainly has a strong Jewish background. Where he stands at the time you're hiring him, you may not be the case, but so that kind of stood out. But in terms of experiences, I had varied experiences. As I started, the first job that I did get, which was at a real estate firm that did basically just real estate. That was the specialty that it did, and turned other businesses away, basically. It was interesting. I was a young associate, and I was working under a junior partner. And there was a particular deal that I was required to fly out with the junior partner to Denver, Colorado. And we actually closed the sale of the Brown Palace Hotel in Denver, Colorado, which was like the Waldorf Astoria in New York.
Still exists, this hotel?
I'm sorry?
It still exists?
I believe it does. Yeah. I believe it would be under the same name, but I haven't checked, to be honest with you. But a mistake happened. And what happened was that there were two parts of the hotel: the old distinguished part of the hotel, which everybody always wanted to be in. And then they had an annex because they didn't have enough rooms, which is a brand new hotel. But somehow they got my name and my junior partner's name mixed up. And I ended up in the presidential suite of the Brown Palace Hotel, and the junior partner, who was my boss, ended up in the new hotel, but it had no thing. And I was in literally in the presidential suite. I went in the elevator. I went up on the elevator with an escort. And when I got there, there was a man sitting outside the door, and he introduced himself and said that he was at my service the entire night for whatever I needed. Now, all I needed to do was go to sleep because I was exhausted.
The presidential suite means the president of the United States would use that, or president of a different country, or not necessarily?
Yes, it was reserved. It was like an entire floor. There were like 5 bedrooms. I could sleep in any bed I wanted to.
Which bed did you sleep in?
I think it was the presidential one, yeah.
Who was president at that time? Reagan?
Lincoln.
No, not Lincoln. Reagan.
It could have been, but that wasn't. But that was it was just a room that was reserved not just for presidents, but for anybody from other countries that came to Denver as well and stayed. It was like the place to be, like if you were in the Waldorf. Mm-hmm. So the next morning, I met the junior partner, and he said, "Where did you sleep? I didn't see you." I said, "I slept in the presidential." He says, "You got my room. I was supposed to get that room." But anyway, the deal that took place over 2 or 3 days. It was 3 days, I think. And the first 2 days, basically there was no kosher food to be had when lunch broke. They just ordered in for everybody, but there was nothing I could really find. The only thing I had brought with me was a box of like Entenmann's cakes. Mm-hmm. And I left them in my hotel room. So after a long day of working the entire day, I came back and I ate them for dinner, basically. That, and I think maybe a bottle of soda that I bought. And that happened for 2 straight days. On the third day, we closed the deal in the morning, in the early afternoon, and then we were all going to reconvene at the fanciest steakhouse in Denver. I forget the name, and I show up, and this is after 3 days of basically fasting, except having Entenmann's cake at night. I sit down, and of course, what does everybody do? And now we have about 30 people because it was a huge deal, and everybody was there, the lawyers and the assistants, and they offer me a drink, of liquor. I don't normally drink liquor to begin with, but drink liquor basically on an empty stomach is not something you want to do. So I got the drink and I nursed it or whatever it was, and then we came to ordering the appetizer. So everybody ordered their, meat or fish or whatever was appetizer. And I said to the waiter, "I want a plain salad, lettuce, tomato, and nothing on it. No dressing, nothing else added. That's all I want." So they asked me 3 times, "Can I do that?" "No, I don't. That's what I want." Well, sure enough, everybody's appetizer came, and everyone had fancy meat and fish and prepared food appetizer. and they came with mine, and it was the last dish to come, and the salad came, except it had cheese on it, and it had other things on it. And I said, no, I can't have this. I need you to. At this point, everybody at the table said to me, what's the problem? Is there a problem with your order? Why don't you want the cheese on? So that was the time I had to come as a young associate.
Oh, they didn't know you were Jewish?
Well, the other people at the table did not. My junior partner knew that I was. And I did not wear a yarmulke because I wasn't going to wear a yarmulke because that would be Morris Iron in a non-kosher restaurant if somebody knew that I was kosher. So clearly before I made the drink, I took my napkin and I put it on my head and I made a bracha. But they didn't notice that. But certainly they did notice that I was having this disagreement about the salad and what I could eat, and they had to go back and redo it. So everybody asked me, why are you doing that? Is everything okay? At which point I said, you know what? I'm just going to tell them the truth. And I said, I'm Jewish, I'm kosher. And they said, oh, so is the salad not kosher? I said, no, it's kosher. I said, but the cheese was a problem. They said, is cheese not kosher? I said, no, kosher cheese is kosher, but it has to be kosher cheese. And why is it that you can't have dressing? And I said, I can't have dressing because that's something that's spicy. And if I use a fork from the restaurant and I put it in the spice and it's spicy, it's like it was heated up. And that means that it would transfer the non-kosher to the salad that I'm eating. At which point,
you're giving like a smicha class.
At which point, everyone was interested in this, and the entire discussion of the celebration for closing the deal focused on everyone who was so interested.
How many rabbis did you ordain that night?
And these were all lawyers, so they could relate to it because they're relating to the details, right? So I had this full explanation. By that time, everybody was like, they felt proud of themselves that they knew everything about kashrut and all of that.
You felt almost like you had to be a rabbi to explain these things. So you have to really know your stuff.
But I had explained to them that if it was cold, that I could have it. And so then at the end, they didn't bring cake because it just happened in this restaurant that they brought fresh fruit. So they said to me, would you like some fresh fruit? And they put it down, and I didn't eat it. So everybody then turned to me. Wait a second. It's cold. It's fruit. Why can't you eat it? I said I can, but having had the liquor and salad that I couldn't eat, I'm sick to my stomach, and I don't want to have anything to eat. And they said, "Oh, I get it. Okay." But so the entire discussion turned on that. So I tried to avoid it, but I was the center of attention.
You ever feel like you wish almost like you weren't Jewish, you're able to partake in these foods that the non-Jews are able to take and not just have this whole discussion and center around you and the kashrus? Do you ever feel that way? Obviously, you keep the laws because of your faith, and as Orthodox Jewish, I'm Jewish because you're Jewish, but did you ever feel on a personal level like you just wish you didn't have all these dietary laws and all these laws to deal with? Not really.
There is a feeling of, oh, what am I going to do now because people are going to ask me these questions. But that first instance of a relatively young age where I had to face it, and where the others actually were very interested and not critical. They were respectful of the fact that I actually adhered to something which was higher than myself. And so most people, and there were some Jews there as well, mostly not, but there were also Jews there. So generally, people were very friendly, and they were not. I didn't feel any discrimination or anything like that. They just were ignorant. They didn't understand it, and then afterwards they did, and it was just very funny. Then that after they understood it, and halachically they thought I could eat it, and they were right. I just didn't want to. So that was the first instance at a relatively young age, and then there were other instances.
How old were you in that?
So I would have been. I would have been 24.
24.
Yeah, 24. Right? Because I
graduated.
When
that was 1982?
I started law school when I was 21. That was in 19... let's see, 50. No, that would have been 22. I was born in 50. Oh, 58. So yeah. So this would have been, I don't know, 83, 84.
I was alive because I was born in 1982.
Yeah.
So I was alive.
Yeah.
So it's because I was
You were
born.
at my graduation.
I was at your graduation.
Yes, I have a picture of you. Mommy's holding you.
I can just imagine my father sitting there and he's like, all right, bring out the steaks. And then he's like, wait, one day I'm going to have a son who's going to give shiurim on YouTube. I can't bring myself to eat these steaks.
Definitely.
Right? Remember you had those thoughts?
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that was actually a young age, 24 years old. I mean, when I was 24 years old, it's really young to be in, a lot of pressure to try to conform to, you want to hide your identity, but on the other hand, you have to keep the laws. And not everybody. Do you think that nowadays people are more aware of, kosher and things like that in the business world?
I think certainly they are, because there are a lot more kosher restaurants and such. And certainly New York, if you practice in New York, even if Jews are not necessarily observant or observant of the laws of kashrut, they clearly are aware of Orthodox Jews, because there's a strong presence in the New York and in most major metropolitan areas like Chicago and Los Angeles and so on. It's when you get to places which really don't have a strong Orthodox community that people may be more ignorant. But now with the internet, I think that's probably not the case. I think people are more aware of these things.
Do you feel like when you were going through this, like it was just too much to handle, and like you felt maybe it was better to inform, like you learned to inform people beforehand? Like you went to this restaurant, you ended up, they trying to avoid it. You told me that, I remember you told me when you're working at, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, you used to tell me you have like parties around the holidays and things like that. And you would go to a non-kosher restaurant oftentimes, but they would order for you, from like La Marais or something like that. It was in the city.
That's correct.
And they would order a kosher meal because obviously you told them beforehand, and that firm knew you were Jewish, Orthodox. I think there were other Orthodox Jews there also that probably helped you also. But
right, and not only that, it got so much better that, for example, it could be La Marais, but many times it was Abigail's, would bring your entire frozen dinner, but with fine china that was disposable, and with cutlery that was metal cutlery, but that was kosher Tovel cutlery. And the only issue there is, and everybody I think that has been in a similar situation can understand this. You can only imagine when everyone's getting a waiter serving it to you, and it's already opened in front of you, the entire dish with the side dishes and so on. When a kosher meal gets delivered by a different restaurant, it comes completely sealed in foil. And then you have to unwrap the foil it gets heated up in the plate. So everything is covered. So you're trying to open this foil, which is steaming hot. And then you're trying to rip it as everybody else is already eating, and they're all looking at you and trying to figure out why you have something that looks like it's wrapped up like Fort Knox. And then where do you put this foil? Because it's a crowded table. So, but it got better over the years. I used to be a member of the, advisory board of title companies, and we would have regular monthly meetings, and they would be in non-kosher restaurants, but the food always came from Abigail's, and the waiters already knew this, and they would come over to me and say, here's the dish, it's covered. Is it okay if I open it over there while you look, not in a closed room, as I take off the foil? And that's what they would do, and then they'd bring it back to you with this, with the plate, with it out, so I didn't have to worry about it appearing, unwieldy and so on. So
I see this also just, I'm not in that business world, but I see, a lot of people are willing to go with their, Jewish names, if they have like a name like Chaim or something like that, or a name like, Naphtali or something. They're willing to use their non-Jewish names in the business world because I think it's just accepted that people understand the Orthodox Jewish, people a little better nowadays than they did years ago.
Yes, I mean, I definitely went through an age where it was possible to do it, and it became easier as more stuff was available. But there were people that today I think it's even easier to some degree. But you're always faced with that challenge. I mean, the other experiences that I had were I was also at one point in my career was working for an Irish Catholic firm, which everyone had known. At least the word was that they were very anti-Semitic. And in truth, what I found out was that they were just the opposite. In fact, they were the first ones when I was working on early Fridays, when you have to rush to get home on Shabbos. They were the ones that threw me out of the office and said, Jay, get out of here. Shabbos is coming. And they were very respectful of it. So I actually found it was much easier sometimes working for a Catholic or a non-Jewish firm than a Jewish firm that says, well, we're Jewish too, but, we still can stay late.
You mean like a Jewish, like conservative, they don't conservative or
right,
reform
that
people
we're not
or
necessarily
non-religious,
observant, right.
Not observant people, because they say, we're Jewish also, right? We don't have any problem with working on the Sabbath.
Right.
Why do you have a problem with it? Are you more religious than us? Are you better than us?
Right. And you always could sense it because you'd walk out early and you kind of turn around and you could see everybody looking up and watching you walk out. It was nothing that was outright in your face, but it was certainly something that you felt and sensed.
I remember one time you told me a story that there was a very big meeting or something like this, and for some reason the deal had to be done by Friday, and then it was delayed a little bit longer, and finally the guy who you were waiting for came at a late hour on Friday, and they had to do this deal on Friday, and you said you have to leave by a certain time. For Shabbos was coming early, and you walked out, and they were all astonished that you left.
Right. Well, the story of that was very interesting because I made it my business to never, if I could, never schedule any closing for a Friday. And if I had to schedule a closing for a Friday, it had to take place in the morning so that if it was even an early Friday, I would have no problem. But in this particular case, it was a deal during a time where right now we're going through some questionable times in terms of where the real estate market is going to go. But at that time, we were dealing with, there had already been a collapse. This was in 1987, the stock market crashed, and real estate didn't really start diving until 6 months later in 1988. And at that point, from 1988 to 1993, the real estate market was basically in the toilet. And a lot of lawyers, real estate lawyers out of work. That was the time that I was working for the Irish Catholic firm. And we ended up representing a lot of banks. And the federal government at the time was basically trying to resolve all these bad debts and so on. And it was writing off many loans and so on. And there were owners who were making a lot of money on the fact that their loans were getting written off, even though the building was completely viable and had tenants in it and was paying rent, but the federal government is totally inept and they don't care.
This was under which president?
Well,
Clinton, Reagan, Bush?
I don't recall who the presidents were at the time. It was a span of 5 years.
I think Reagan exited in 1988 and Bush was 1988, 92.
Yeah.
And then Clinton.
So in any event, there was someone who called up in this case and said, we have to close this deal by by Friday. And I promise we will close it in the morning. I said, okay, but if this deal is not closed by noontime, it's not going to close. And he said, don't worry, I'll be there early. Well, that morning came, and then I got a phone call that he's a little late and he'll be there in an hour. And anyway, it kept going on and on and on. And meanwhile, now we're in the afternoon and he keeps calling me, I'm coming, I'm on my way. And I said to him, look, unless you're here by this time, okay, there won't be enough time to close the deal because I have to leave for the Sabbath. And it's not going to close. No, I'm going to be there. Well, it was already now about 45 minutes before candle lighting. And there was a room full of people because everyone was there except this person that was bringing the documents that we needed to close the deal. And I already had my coat on and my hat on, and I was fully ready, about to go out of the office. And everyone there, I told them I would have to leave. This guy runs in with his papers. He's running down the hall. He comes into the room. I'm here. Let's close. I said, I'm sorry, I have to leave. He says, but I'm here. I have everything. I said, but didn't I tell you it had closed before 12? And now it's 3:30 in the afternoon, and the Sabbath starts at 4:15. So the entire table looked at me and says, you're really not going to leave, are you?
How many people were there? An estimation?
15, 16.
15 people. Wow.
I said, yes, I am, but it can close on Monday. You're just going to leave? I said, yes. I'll see you on Monday. And I left. And guess what? It closed on Monday.
And that was the Shabbos. We didn't have any challah because you couldn't pick up the challah on your way home. So we ate white bread. No, I'm joking.
But this was the firm, this Irish Catholic firm,
Wow.
that were the ones that sent me out. And even then they told me, Jay, just leave.
Oh, the firm told you to
They
leave.
said it's okay, leave.
Well, you're saying, wait a second. The people around the table were not from the firm?
No, they were all different parties.
You were representing your firm.
I was representing.
see.
I was not representing the firm. I worked for the firm, but I was representing our client, and our client was the one that held the loan.
I see.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so they supported that 100%. So in terms of that, you can see the reverse side in terms of anti-Semitism. It was just the opposite. The Irish Catholic firms were the most understanding.
Did it work out that Monday you went back and you were able to close the deal?
Yes,
It was.
it all worked.
And when you came back on Monday, what did they say to you? Did they recall what happened on Friday and say, I can't believe you left?
No,
Like-
we just closed it.
You just closed. No
And
talking.
they kept
all
threatening
business.
that if it didn't close, it wasn't going to close because the other parties wouldn't agree to it. And
Before you left on Friday, they were
Yeah.
threatening.
yeah,
And you had the courage to just walk out and just leave.
I didn't have. It's not a
I
question
mean,
of courage.
it's hard, yeah.
It's a yes. It's black and white. You either have to come to face with who you are and what's important to you in life, and what's not, and you have to have the emunah that if this is the right thing to do, this is what Hashem wants you to do. It's not always easy to do it. I'm not saying it's easy, but once you do it, you feel free because you know
Something
it's
higher
important.
than you.
Yeah.
You know, I once heard a story. You've heard of Ben Brockman, I'm sure.
Sure.
He's a lawyer. You know, he's a famous criminal
One of
defense
the
lawyer.
best criminal defense.
So he
lawyers.
actually happens to be Orthodox. I mean, people would classify him as Orthodox Jewish, but he happened to have actually a brother who was a rabbi. I think he passed away. He was in a yeshiva in Far Rockaway. I think they called the yeshiva Far Rockaway. He was a big rabbi over there. And he told a story about his brother, Ben Brockman. And Ben Brockman sometimes on Fridays, not like you, if something got held up at work, he had to come late, he came home a couple minutes, an hour, half an hour after Shabbos had already started. And his brother, who was a rabbi, said, what happened? He said, I'm sure Hashem understands. Hashem understands, Hashem understands. I'm part of the working world. Listen, this is the way it works, And his brother said back to him, he said, no, that's not the way it works in Judaism. I believe in halacha, and halacha is, basically unwielding just because you have business to take care of. But you see, Dad, you're more committed than Ben Brockman. And therefore, you're a better lawyer than Ben Brockman because because lawyers have to be truthful, right?
Well,
If you're loyal to your religion, you're truthful in your practice, right?
Listen, everyone is faced with different challenges, and no circumstance is exactly exactly alike. And so each case really has to be analyzed on its own merits. And there's no way you can't really compare what one person may have done or didn't do or was able to do. The point is that it has gotten a lot easier these days. But in general, my experience through life was that the people that were religious people, not necessarily your own religion, respected others that were. And the ones that weren't necessarily as observant felt, if it's good enough for me, why can't you do it too?
That's an interesting thought. You would never think like that. But, in America, a lot of people, are associated with Christianity and things like that. So, it's a basically evangelical country. So,
I could tell you one other story if you
Sure,
have
go
time.
ahead.
I don't know if we have time for it, but this
well,
is
if
actually,
it's a good story, is it a good story?
yeah, it's a funny story.
Okay, good. So let's hear it.
So, generally speaking, I used to go to work on Tisha B'Av because I didn't want to look as if I'm taking off Tisha B'Av when technically I could work, even though many people feel that it's not right to go to work. So I would generally go and try to go home and leave early. And this one particular time, I was pretty sure that I was going to be able to do that. So I didn't even bring my tefillin with me. And I planned on leaving, like at 12:30, 1 o'clock, maybe get to a mincha there or get to a mincha at home and do that. Well, what happened was a deal that I had been working on for a couple of years, which involved a lot of work. All of a sudden, the other side, the head of the other entity, I don't want to name names, was going away on a vacation for 2 weeks. And the deal had to close that day. And it had to close at their offices. And there was no way I could get out of it. I had to work the entire Tisha B'Av while fasting.
Wow.
And we showed up at the offices of the other attorney and the client. And this client had the attorney, they had about 10 attorneys on their staff. And I was the only attorney representing my client on a large deal. And it had to be negotiated. So when you have it and you do it around the conference room table, so you're all there, so the clients are there and the attorneys are there, and all these decisions could be made, and you get redrafts of the agreement after you negotiate it, and then each side looks at it each time it changes and has time to look at it. So there were many redrafts that happened, and meanwhile I'm fasting, and this is going on now during the day and into the afternoon, and every time I had to look at it, I was only one person, so I didn't need to consult. They had a team. So it took me about 15 minutes to see what I thought of the changes they made, and I gave them the comments back. Then they would go huddle with their team of 8 or 10, and it took them, an hour and a half to get back, and we're just sitting around. And meanwhile, lunch had come, and I couldn't eat lunch.
What was for lunch that day?
Whatever it was, I don't know, but it was lunch.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And then each time I got it back to them in about 20 minutes, and I'm one attorney. And they, again, took forever. And now we're getting towards dinner time. And I said to them, well, guys, I haven't eaten. I had told them that they knew, but I explained it to them anyway. And that's why I didn't eat lunch when it came. And there was another round of redrafts that came to me, and I was able to get it to them right before Mincha. But what was I going to do for Mincha? Because I didn't have my tefillin with me. But I was next to the Fifth Avenue Synagogue, and I told them I had to go to services. I did go to services. I met the rabbi. I asked if he had an extra pair of tefillin and a talis, which he did. I met my cousin there, who was also he was working for in the business world. He lives out actually in the Five Towns, and he happened to have to work that same day too, and we both met for mincha. And then I went back. Anyway, long and short of it is, I had to then eat after Marav. One problem: it's Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av just ended. Even in Manhattan, go find a restaurant that's open post Tisha B'Av.
Didn't you have like a grocery store or something like that?
No, I'm talking about for a kosher meal.
Oh,
many kosher restaurants. No, but at this point, I wanted a meal.
Oh, okay.
So the broker, who happened to be also an Orthodox Jew, the real estate broker who was there at the meeting, he recommended, he found a restaurant. And the hashgacha on the restaurant, in my opinion, was a little questionable. It's not one that I would necessarily want. He said to me, "You're killing me here." He says, "I finally, you know how long it took me to find a restaurant?" He says, "I'm going to eat it." I said, "I don't feel comfortable doing that." It's all right. I just don't feel comfortable doing that. So I then got on the phone, called up, and I found a restaurant with a proper hashgacha. And they sent mine over and the brokers over, and I told them to send a couple of them because I was hungry.
Couple of
Anyway, the food then came for the other people that were there, many of who were Jewish, but not, and now was dinner time, and they had already eaten lunch. Anyway, they tasted, we got a whole bunch of meals, so they tasted them. And they said, would you mind if we take some of these meals? Because this is much better than the non-kosher stuff. I said, sure. I had enough to eat, and that was fine. We went till 3 in the morning.
3 in the morning. Wow.
3 in the morning.
Imagine if you didn't find that restaurant.
No, I did. I ate.
I'm saying, imagine if you didn't
That's
have a
what I'm
restaurant at
saying.
3 a.m. on a Tisha
And
B'Av.
at 3 a.m., the deal closed, and everything worked out. I took a car service home. I got home around 4:30 in the morning, and the deal closed on through Tisha B'Av and on Tisha B'Av. So it was something I expected, no, but that is a challenge. Other people might meet the challenge by saying, well, you know what? You just shouldn't be working on Tisha B'Av, and that's how you should do it. On the other hand, I like to think I couldn't leave my client high and dry and have him, lose out, because then I think he would have looked negatively on Yiddishkeit. Instead, I think at least it was somewhat of a Kiddush Hashem, that I wasn't hiding who I was, but I was doing the best that I could do. And the deal closed. The client was happy, and they understood that sometimes you have to let people know who you are and be proud of who you are.
I'll ask you one last question. Did you, because like you've portrayed or admitted at sometimes that you're an Orthodox Jew, did your keeping of Jewish laws ever lead other people to, be more cognizant or adhere more to Jewish laws or ethics in the Jewish business world? Do you feel like you had an effect on other people, or it was just basically you were just protecting your own standards?
That's a hard thing to know, because you never know after people see what you do, whether it affects them or it doesn't affect them. That's not the reason you do it. You do it because you feel you have to be committed and true to yourself. But I would like to think that people take something out of that and feel that a stronger connection. I know my client, who I represented, who were Jewish. The family is a Jewish family, but they're more in the Reform spectrum. But they always respected very much whatever my position. In fact, they said to me, Jay, if you don't want to do this, I understand. And he says it would really be hard for us, but I would respect it. And I said, no, I said, I'm here. I said, I'm going to do it for you. I'm not going to leave you hanging. But, in the end, it all worked out well. And we got a great contract signed up and negotiated, and deal closed, and the client did very well. And the other side got what they were looking for, and it all worked out. But sometimes it won't, and you have to be prepared for that, but I think what's important is that you know who you are.
Well, there was one person that you did, maybe more than one person. There's that one person that your life had an effect on. And it was me, because, I heard some of these stories, and, whether you didn't tell them to me consciously to have an imprint on me and, to raise me in the Jewish way, Orthodox way, but hearing about some of these stories over the years about adhering to Jewish normative law in the face of tough business world. I don't know what it was like. Obviously, I was never a part of it, but it definitely had an effect on me as a person, because I grew up and I said, listen, my father, in a very difficult situation among a lot of, in a business world where deals have to get done, there's a lot of money on the line, and he's a lot of non-Jewish people who could possibly have anti-Semitic views. He's willing to stand up for, walk out on a deal before Shabbos. So it has an effect on me also over the years, just recalling those things. It wasn't so much consciously, but it just subconsciously stuck into me that, if you're willing, in such adverse conditions, me growing up in a yeshiva world, Yeshiva University, and after Yeshiva University, I was in Israel learning in different yeshivas. If you're willing to do it in a tough environment like that with non-Jews and pressure and money on the line, me, when it's a lot easier, I should at least be cognizant and try to adhere to the Jewish laws and customs as well when it's a lot easier for me. So definitely the one person, and maybe the most important person, that your stories and your life had an impact is on me and my kids and your other children also, I'm sure.
Well, that's a
Uh,
satisfying thing for a father to hear, and I appreciate that. And but I have to then, life is a cycle, so I have to kind of like go back one level before me, and for you to say that you heard it from me, so it inspired you. I got inspired by your grandfather, Louis Lang, who was a committed Orthodox Jew in America, beginning in 1939 when he got out on his last train and from Budapest before the Nazis could close the border, and was able to come here at the age of 17 and fight, get drafted in the American Army in World War II and fight 3 years in the 101st Airborne. And every morning, get up before everyone else did and light a candle so he could see and put on his tefillin and daven. And never forgot who he was. And every morning, that's what he would do. And in fact, all of these other soldiers used to come to him in his group, and they used to quietly say to him, they called him preacher, light a candle for me too. And he wasn't lighting the candle because that's what a lot of Catholics, they always light candles. He was lighting a candle so he could see in the siddur and he could daven. But that was his commitment, and it couldn't be easy. There were a lot of anti-Semites there, and they always used to call him "you blank Jew." And
tell that story with the bomb shelter where he went to. That's a good story.
Oh yeah, well, he was named a preacher. Well, he used to tease them too. Before I get to that, he used to tease them because he went to shave, and he had a very clean shave. And, almost no beard, no stubble when he shaved. So they said to him, they used to see him shaving. And they said, how do you get such a clean shave? And he says, it's easy. It's the wood stick that I use. Because he wasn't using a razor. They said, well, how does this wood stick better than a steel razor? He says, it just is. And they'd see that he's doing it. And what they didn't realize is he would put on a cream, which is a special cream which Orthodox Jews did, so that they weren't using a razor. He was only using a stick because the cream was the one that took out the hair, and he just used the stick to do it. So the other said, Lang, can I use your stick? So he gave him the stick, but he didn't give him the cream. And they're going this, and they're cutting up their face, and they can't shave. And, he used to play games with these guys. But the story you're talking about was he was in the 101st Airborne. And for people who don't know what that was the, the Screaming Eagles. And that was their title. They were basically paratroopers that jumped in, threw parachuted out of planes, and went behind enemy lines to fight the enemy and to surprise them. And it was basically a suicide mission. Most of the people who were had to be volunteers. You couldn't be drafted into that unit. And my dad actually didn't realize that he was volunteering, because at the last minute he was in a different outfit, and before they went overseas to Europe, they said to the captain said to him, Lang, you want to be in a different unit? They need an extra person. And he said, what unit is that? He says, I have no time to tell you. Are you in or out? So he says, okay, I'm in. And Grandpa, I'm in. Okay. He didn't know he was just volunteering for basically suicide missions. But he lucked out, and he ended up getting part of the quartermaster, which is the supplies, which has to always be protected. And so he never really had to fight per se. He was involved in some battles, but he never really even had to shoot his gun.
He parachuted down. He
trained. He
never actually parachuted down?
He trained, and he may have in the details I don't know there, but he was in several battles. But they were, in this particular battle, the 101st fought in Bastogne, which was a city, a small town where all the roads in Europe, France and Belgium and Germany, everything converged around here. And if you held this town, then you could stop the Germans. But the Germans came with everything they had at the end of the war to try to break it open and get more time before they develop a nuclear bomb.
That was the Battle of the Bulge.
The Battle of the Bulge. And Grandpa was in a building with his non-Jewish. They used to always call him you blank Jew, and Jew boy. But the bombs were falling in this big warehouse around it, and all of the other soldiers were up, and they were playing cards, and they were drinking, and they were smoking. And your grandfather used to take his clothes off and get into his underwear and go under the blanket and go to sleep. And they say, "You blank Jew boy, how can you do this? You're not afraid?" And he said to them, "If God wants me to live, I'm going to live. And if God wants me to die, I'm going to die. But I'm tired and I'm going to sleep." Now, it sounds silly, right? But it's not. It's very simple. He had a very simple understanding. It's not up to me. It's up to Hashem. And I've done what I have to do. And I put my faith in Hashem. And staying up, playing cards and drinking isn't going to change anything. So anyway, he did that. And they used to call him your preacher boy, and all of that. And a couple of days later, his friend by the name of Klein, who was in a related outfit in the same area, came over to him and said, "Louis, you got to help me, Shlomi." He says, all of the non-Jews are making fun of me because I'm sleeping in the bunker underground, and they're calling me a Jewish coward. So Grandpa got out of his cot. He got dressed. He put on his clothes. And all of the other people sitting around said to him, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm going to sleep in the bunker." He says, "Why, preacher, you're not afraid of anything. Why are you sleeping in the bunker?" He says, "I am." Immediately they jumped up and said, No. The preacher knows something. Where the preacher goes, we're going. So they all went to sleep in the bunker. The next morning, the building that they had been in, they came out, was all gone. It had been decimated. From then on, they said to him, "Preacher Lang, wherever you go, you know somebody, you got a connection. Wherever you go, we go." And what do I say? What do I learn from this? I think what we learn from it is that if you have, if you do the right thing, what did Grandpa do? He didn't want his friend to be embarrassed. It's a terrible thing for someone to be embarrassed and called a coward. So he did this. And because they all knew that Grandpa wasn't scared, they figured he knows something. He didn't know anything. Maybe he did. But he didn't really know anything. So he went. They followed him. So not only did he live because he helped his friend, so maybe there's a chut of that mitzvah, he was saved. But all these other soldiers who were they were taken out of jail, they were life sentences for the crimes they committed, and that's why they volunteered in the airborne. These guys lived too. So it just goes to show you that one person being committed to Yiddishkeit can save a village.
That's amazing. While we're on the topic of my grandfather and, being committed to Judaism, you always tell a story, I'm going to just tell it again, of your brother was in RJJ, I believe. And
we don't mention yeshivas.
All right, it was questionably RJJ or a different yeshiva. We won't tell you which one it was. What's the story there?
Well, Benji my older brother started to go to high school. He went for elementary school to North Shore Hebrew Academy, but he's 8 years older than me. So it ended by like 7th grade. He went through 6th grade and then it ended. And so I think he was in the first class of the North Shore Hebrew Academy. So he ended up he got into Hank had just opened up, and he was able to get into Hank in the 7th grade. And he was there for the 7th grade, the 8th grade, and then the 9th grade. When it came to the 10th grade, Hank closed. It ended at the 9th grade. So now he had to get into high school, which starts at 9th grade. Well, you know what it is. If the classes are full, you can't get in. So he couldn't get into MTA. He couldn't get into other yeshivas. So he went to another yeshiva, which will remain unnamed, and he met with the Rosh Yeshiva. And he asked the Rosh Yeshiva if he could get his son into school. And he said, "Where do you live?" He says, "Great Neck." He says, "What do you do?" He says, "I'm a dry cleaner." He said, "I'm sorry, we can't take your son." "Why? What do you mean you can't take my son?" He says, "We only take children from Shomer Shabbos homes." He says, "How do you know I'm not Shomer Shabbos?" He said, "First of all, a dry cleaner has to be open on Saturday. Otherwise, they would go out of business. It's the busiest day of the week in dry cleaning because people have weddings to go to, they have bar mitzvahs to go to, they got to pick their clothes up. And second of all, what was the second of all? And second of all, Great Neck has no Jews, Orthodox Jews. So if you're living in Great Neck, it's impossible that you're Orthodox." So Grandpa, in his own inimitable way, reached down into his pocket and pulled out a key and said to the Rosh Yeshiva, "What's this?" He says, "It's a key." So Grandpa said, "No, it's not just a key. This is the key to my store. Every Friday afternoon, I take the key, I put it in the door, in the keyhole, and I turn it and lock the door. How hard is that?" "Okay, Mr. Lang, we'll take your son."
And that's, I guess, what, I'll just say quickly, my uncle, my father's older brother, he actually opened, later in life, he opened a Chinese restaurant in Main Street in Kew Garden Hills. It was called Tanley Chow. I don't know if anyone remembers that. But he was actually very careful that he started a new practice because during the 9 days, right, you're not supposed to eat meat. It was a fleishik restaurant. They only served meat. So he was under the kashrus of which organization? The OU it was?
The Vada of Queen.
The Vada of Queen. So they said it's okay. You don't have to change, get new woks, new frying pans or whatever for the food that you're making. And he said, but what did he say? He said because people are going to mistake it. They're going to think that.
Well, it actually worked that they walked in. He was open for the 9 days, and all the stores could be open for the 9 days. And when the mashgiach, he would always regularly come in. He happened to come in during the 9 days, and he said to him, "What are these woks? They look like they're new." So my brother said, "They are new." He says, "Why did you get new woks?" He said, "Because it's the 9 days." And he says, "Well, you don't need them during the 9 days. You can eat out of a fleishik wok. You just can't. You shouldn't eat meat." And my brother said, "Well, I don't look at it that way, because in my opinion, any customer who comes in is going to pick this up and know that they can eat it, but they're going to assume that it's parov. Okay, so they're going to think that since it's not that they may think then that they can put this on their milchik dishes, but it's going to be hot food, and then they're going to have a problem with their milchik dishes. I don't want. Yes, you're right. They can eat it, but I don't want to be on my head that they trafed up their dishes." So he said, "Well, you don't need to do it. We don't require it for other stores." And he said, "Well, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying I won't do that. So I spent my own money to buy the new woks and the utensils, so I know that it's parov." The next year, the Vada required all stores who are open to do the same.
So you see, it was because of your father.
Ultimately, it all came down, and
he was
now
very careful.
And now
so that's what you see. So even if you don't have an effect on other people who might see what you're doing, and maybe it's difficult to stand up for your religion in the face of others, people will mock you and people will get upset with you. The greatest people that you help is your children, really, because they know who their father is, they know who their ancestors are, and obviously everyone makes their own choices in life, in which direction, how far they want to take their Judaism, how they want to lead their lives. But ultimately in your subconscious is bury these experiences that you heard from your father and your grandfather. And that's why I have a show called Jewish Money and not just called Money. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me, Dad.
Thank you for interviewing me and giving us both the ability to share some stories, that may hopefully will inspire others.
No, definitely should inspire others. And this will be probably my last episode from America for a while. So it's been nice knowing America, but Israel
rocks.
We'll talk about that at a different time. All right. Be well. Have a good week. Bye.